Now let us understand. So now normally in RAM, okay, so normally in a laptop, so you'll have two components, right, to store the data. So what are the two components? So RAM and ROM. So ROM is also known as hard disk, correct? No. So now normally in a laptop you will have three important things. So first one is CPU, second one is RAM memory, third one is hard disk. So now I'll ask you one small question. So if you're writing some code, you're writing some code in PyCharm editor, so where that code will be saved? So where it will be saved? So I'm getting mixed answers. So tell me fast. So where it will be saved? I am talking about where it will be saved. I'm not asking about memory. Okay, I'm asking where it will be saved, either in the hard disk or in the RAM memory. Okay, so definitely it will be saved in hard disk. So for example, there is one developer. So he's writing some code using PyCharm. So initially it will be saved to hard disk. Okay, so remember every program will be saved to hard disk. But so when you execute that code, the processor will load that file into RAM memory. So can you tell me why? Okay, so remember this CPU is fast memory. Okay, so CPU will execute the program faster. Now if I'm executing the code from hard disk, so hard disk is slow memory. Hard disk is slow memory. It will take more time to execute. So this RAM memory is faster and CPU is faster. So if I want to execute the program faster, so what I have to do? So I have to load this data into RAM memory. So automatically the processor will load the file in RAM memory. Okay, so when I execute or when I run this program, this particular file will be loaded into RAM and it will be executed inside the RAM. Is it clear? Is it clear? Okay, so now after executing, you will get the output in your monitor. So after execution, you will get output in your monitor. Okay, so some examples of maybe some program I've written. In that program I've written print welcome. So after executing, I'll get output in the monitor as welcome. Okay, so here you have to understand two differences. Okay, so why the difference? So first difference is related to speed. So which is fast memory? RAM. Okay, so RAM will execute the program faster. So during execution, your file will be copied to RAM. And the second difference is about the storage. So this is temporary storage, this is permanent storage. Okay, so if you are storing any data inside RAM, so once you are restarting the system, so everything will be deleted. But when you store data inside hard disk, it will be there. So until and unless you delete it, okay, until and unless you delete the file, it will be present inside the hard disk. Is this clear? Is this clear? The difference between hard disk and RAM memory? Okay, so now we have to understand memory of objects. So when you create any object, so what memory will be occupied? Okay, so now I have created a dummy class. The class name is test. The class name is test. Now inside this I'm simply printing class. Okay, so here what is important? So where this object will be created. Okay, now I'm writing test1 is equal to test. So what I'm doing here? So I'm creating a object. So definitely I'm creating an object. So what it will do? The PyCharm will, okay, execute the file. So where it will be executed? In the RAM. Very good. It will be executed inside the RAM. So now in the RAM memory, it will create an object. In the RAM memory, it will create an object. So you can see this is my RAM memory. So in this RAM memory, it will create the object. So what is the object name? Test1. So this test1 will be created inside my RAM memory. So after that, what is this? It's a class, right? So what I'm doing, I'm trying to create the object. So it will create. So test object. It will create test object. Now it will be created at some memory. Okay. So remember, this is the object. This is the object name. This is the object. This is the object name. So this object will be created in some memory location. So we don't know in what memory location it is going to be created. So I'm taking some dummy address. So maybe 0x100. We don't know the actual address. So I'm taking some dummy address. Now this address will be stored inside this variable. This address will be stored inside variable test1. So this, okay, so it will return the address, and that address will be stored inside this test1. So you can see same thing here. So the address is stored inside this variable, and this will be pointing to this address. Is it clear? The example. So first of all, this part will be executed. So when this part is executed, it will create a variable. So variable called test1. So after that, it will go to right hand side. Now in the right hand side, it will try to create the object. So now it has created the object. So that object will be created in some memory location. Okay, so we don't know the memory location. So I'm assuming 0x100. So after that, this address will be stored inside this variable. This address will be stored inside this variable, and it will be pointing to this object. So this variable will be pointing to this object. Is this clear? So similarly, I'm creating one more object. So similar operation will be performed. So if I'm creating one more object, so similar kind of operation will be performed. So it will create the variable test2. It will create the variable test2. So after that, what it will do? So after creating the variable, what it will do? It will create the object. So it will create the object of test class. So maybe the name is test object 2. Now after this, what it will do? It will give some address. Okay. So remember, this address will be different. So this address is different. This address is different. So after this, what it will do? It will store the address inside this variable, and it will be pointing to this object. Okay, so this is one interesting question. So why RAM is faster than ROM? Okay, so remember, why RAM is faster? Because, so if you check your laptop or your phone, so if I'm having one 64 GB phone, so how much RAM will be there? So maybe 8 or 4, correct? No, not 16, not get 16. Okay, so maybe 8 or 4, correct? No, so why will have RAM? So normally, if you open any application, so where it will be executed? Inside the RAM. So if you want to play some game, so what you need? You need more RAM. Okay, because that RAM is fast memory, so it cannot load the data from your internal storage, because that is slow memory. So for that, what you do, whenever you open any application, so it will be open inside the RAM. Okay, so that you can play that game. So is this clear? The internal operations. Okay, so remember, whenever you create any object, so same kind of operation will be performed. Okay, similarly, if I create one more object, okay, if I create one more object, so for example, test3 is equal to test. So what it will do? It will create one more variable. So maybe one more variable called test3. So after this, it will create the object. So maybe some object will be created in some memory address 0x300, and that address will be stored here. So 0x300, and it will be pointing to this object. So all these operations will be performed when you create any object. Okay, is it clear? So first, Python creates a variable. So whatever you have learned, so same thing you have in theory here. So first, Python creates a variable test1 in memory. So then Python goes to right hand side. So in the right hand side, it will create the object, okay, of that particular class, and then Python gives some address to that object, and that address will be stored inside the variable. So these are the steps which will be included when you create one object. Okay, so now you have to understand object and init method. Object and init method. So now we can see here I have created one class called test. I have created one class called test. So now inside this I am having one init method, correct? No. So now when I create the object, so what will happen? So it will create a variable as well as one object inside the RAM memory. Okay, so init method will be called immediately after creating object. So now you can see Now, first of all, this variable will be created. So after variable, what will be created? The object will be created. So after object created, so it will give some address. So it will give some address. So after address, what it will do? So it will store the address inside this variable. So after that, it will point. So once this operation is completed, it will automatically call the init method. So once this operation is completed internally, it will automatically call the init method. Okay. So similarly, test2. So what will happen? It will create the variable test2. So after that, it will go to right hand side. It will create the object. So once object is created, it will give some address. So that address will be stored to this particular variable. Then that variable will be pointing to this object. So once it is executed, what it will do? It will automatically call the init method. So you can see. So once it is done, it will automatically call the init method. Is this clear? Okay. So now we'll try to understand what is self. Okay. So till now we have seen, right, self. Now that self will try to understand what is that self. Okay. So now I have written some code. So def class test. So def init self. Print hi. So test1 is equal to test. Okay. Now test2 is equal to test. So now tell me what will happen when I execute this code. What will happen? So it will create how many objects? So 2 objects in the RAM memory, correct? So now in the RAM memory, it will create 2 objects. So T1 object and T2 object. So before that, we have to understand one point here. So remember, self is a predefined keyword in Python. So self is a predefined keyword of Python which contains the address of current object. So what will self store? So self will store the current object address. So whichever object is created, so that address will be stored by self keyword. Okay. Now let us check. So now we have created the object, correct? No. Now it will call this init method, correct? So when it call this init method, so in this init method, what we are having? Self. Now what will be stored inside this self? So what address? So which object address? So whichever object is created now, so what is the address of this object? What is the address of this object? So 0x100. So this self keyword will be replaced by 0x100. So 0x10. So this is the meaning of self keyword. So remember, the self keyword will store the address of current object. Now similarly, so it is done. So once this init method is executed, done. Now we'll try to execute this code. So when you execute this code, what it will do? So it will create the variable T2. So the variable is created now. So once the variable is created, what it will do? It will go to right hand side, and on the right hand side, what it will do? It will create the object, correct? So once object is created, what will happen? So it will be given some address. So this object is given some address. So what after this? So this address will be stored to this T2 variable. So after this, so once the data or once it is created inside the RAM, what will happen? It will call the init method, correct? No, it will call the init method. So now it will call the init method. So now tell me what will be the value of self? Very good. Okay. So now this object is getting executed. So because of that, the self will be having address of object 2. So what is the address? 0x200. So now it will be having address 0x200. So this is the meaning of self keyword. Is it clear now? So what is self keyword? Yes. So self is store the address of current object. Self will not store object, it will store address of object. Okay. So Anand Swami. So self will store address of object. So whichever object you are using, so that object will be that object address will be stored. Okay, so don't worry, it will be clear. Okay, in few slides. So is this clear now? What is self? Okay. So now we have to understand what is the use of constructor. Okay. So we have seen, right? What is constructor? What is constructor? So the init method is known as constructor. So now remember, constructor is used to initialize the object with values. So constructor is used to initialize the object with value. So what is this? We will understand with some example. Okay. So let us see now. So I have created a class called test. So now inside this, I have created what I've created. So I've created a constructor. Now is this constructor taking any parameter? So definitely yes. So how many? One. What is the name? Yeah, very good. So now here I am writing self dot x is equal to m. Now can anyone tell me what is this x? So can anyone tell me what is this x? Very good. Okay. So remember, this x is a variable. This x is a variable. So remember, even this x is a variable. So what we are trying to do? So we are creating one variable inside the, where we are creating? Inside the constructor. Okay, inside the constructor. Now let us see. So when we create some variable inside the constructor, so what will happen, that we have to understand. Okay, so what will happen, that we have to understand. So remember, this is nothing but it's a variable. So this self dot x. Okay, so so this self will be having some address, so don't bother about this self. So remember x. Okay, so this x is a variable. Okay, so now I'm creating the object. So t1 is equal to test. So this test is having one constructor which is having some parameter. So I'm passing one value there. So 10 will be stored inside this m. Correct? No. So now when I create this object, what will happen? So inside the RAM memory, the variable will be created. So inside the RAM memory, the variable will be created. So after variable, the object will be created. So assume this is the object. Now this object will be given some address. Okay. So now in this init method, are we having any variable? In this init method, are we having any variable? Yes. So that we have to understand what will happen to that variable x. Okay. So now after this, it will go to left hand side. So it will store the address. So this will be pointing to this address. So now once this object is created, so what it will do? So it will call the init method. Correct? No. Now once it is done, it will call the init method. So once it calls the init method, so now in this init method, are we having any variable?